A tragic loss. Introduction of the boy. Daniel was a boy of about 12, his eyes always full of determination despite the hardships of life. He lived in a small, humble home on the outskirts of the town, where the streets were lined with dirt and the houses were simple and cramped. His father, a man once strong and proud, had been ill for several months, leaving him unable to walk. His mother, a tireless seamstress, worked late into the night, stitching clothes to earn a living. Though she worked hard, there was never enough to make ends meet. Daniel had always been a responsible boy, understanding the weight of his family's struggles. He knew his mother depended on him to help around the house, but he also worked hard at school, hoping one day to make life better for his family. He was determined to get an education and escape the cycle of poverty that seemed to trap his parents. That morning, his mother had given him the money for his school fees, a small, crumpled envelope with 500 naira. It was all she could afford, and she had entrusted it to him, hoping that he would pay it to the school on time. "Daniel, be careful with the money," his mother had said as she hugged him goodbye. "It's all I have left for you to stay in school." "I will, Mama," Daniel had replied, his heart heavy with the knowledge of his mother's sacrifices. He tucked the money into his pocket, adjusting the fabric of his shirt to make sure it was secure, and set off to school, hoping that the day would go smoothly. The search for lost money. The road to school wasn't long, but it was a rough one. Daniel walked along the dusty path, the heat of the midday sun beating down on him. He could feel the sweat trickling down his neck, but his mind was focused on getting to school and paying the fees before the deadline. As he walked, he patted his pocket to reassure himself that the money was still there. But when he reached the school gate, a sudden feeling of panic washed over him. He reached into his pocket, but it was empty. His heart skipped a beat. He turned around and rushed back, retracing his steps along the road. He searched under bushes, behind rocks, and along the path he had walked, his hands trembling as he searched desperately. He could hardly breathe, his eyes darting around, looking for any sign of the envelope. The minutes turned into hours, and the sun began to sink lower in the sky. His heart sank with every passing second. Daniel had lost it. The money that his mother had worked so hard for, the money that was supposed to secure his future, it was gone. Tears welled in his eyes as he sank to his knees in the middle of the road, his heart heavy with guilt and fear. "How could I have been so careless?" he whispered to himself. "What will Mama say? What will happen to me?" His shoulders shook as sobs racked his body, and he didn't notice the woman watching him from her small stall by the roadside. Meeting the woman, Clara. Clara was an older woman, probably in her mid-50s, with a kind face that was softened by years of hard work and struggle. She was a widow who had lost her husband many years ago, and life had never been easy for her. But she had learned to make do, setting up a small fruit stall by the side of the road to sell what little produce she could grow. She wasn't rich, far from it, but she was content with the little she had, and her heart was always open to those in need. That day, as she sat behind her stall, arranging baskets of ripe bananas and oranges, she noticed the boy in distress. His face was streaked with tears, and he was frantically searching the ground, his hands trembling with desperation. She set down her knife and stood up, her heart aching at the sight of his sorrow. She approached him gently, her voice soft as she asked, "My child, why are you crying like this?" Daniel looked up, startled by the woman's voice. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, sniffling as he tried to explain his predicament. I've lost the money for my school fees," Daniel stammered, his voice shaky. "It was in my pocket, but now I can't find it. My mama gave it to me, and if I don't pay it today, I'll be in trouble." Clara's heart went out to him as she listened to his words. She could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear that she had seen in herself many times over the years. Life had never been kind to her, but she had learned that sometimes, the best way to survive was to help others, even when you had nothing left to give. She looked down at the boy, His shoulders slumped in defeat, and made a decision. "Come, my son," she said softly. "Sit here with me." Clara's sacrifice. Daniel hesitated for a moment, unsure of what the woman wanted. But he was too overwhelmed by his worry to question her. He sat down beside her stall, his head hanging low. Clara looked at him for a moment, and then without saying a word, she reached into a small tin box hidden beneath her stall. She pulled out the money she had earned that day, just a little over 500 naira, the same amount Daniel had lost. She could see the boy's eyes widen in disbelief as she held out the money to him. "Here," Clara said quietly, pressing the money into his hands. "Take it. Go and pay your school fees. I know it's all I have, but I want you to have it." Daniel stared at her, speechless. He could hardly believe what she was offering. "Are you sure, Mama? This is your last money. I can't take it." Clara smiled gently, her eyes full of understanding. "It's all right, my child," she said softly. "I believe in you. Don't waste this opportunity. Go and study hard. One day, you will make something of yourself, and you will remember this moment." With trembling hands, Daniel accepted the money, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you, Mama," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I promise I'll make you proud. One day, I'll come back and repay you. I'll never forget your kindness." Clara smiled warmly, brushing his hair gently with her hand. "I don't need repayment, my son. Just make sure you don't forget that kindness can change the world." As Daniel ran towards the school gate, the weight in his heart began to lift. He still had a long road ahead of him, but he had something far more valuable than money. He had hope. And it was all thanks to the kindness of a stranger. The family struggle. Daniel's return home. After a long and emotional day, Daniel walked slowly back home, his heart heavy with conflicting feelings. His hands clutched the envelope containing the school fees he had just paid, but a deep guilt gnawed at him. Clara's kindness had been a beacon of hope in his time of need, yet accepting her help felt like betraying his mother's trust. His steps were slow, his mind swirling with thoughts of what to tell his parents. The house was quiet when Daniel arrived, his father sitting outside under the shade of the small mango tree in the front yard. His father's weary eyes followed Daniel as he walked up, a faint smile of relief crossing his face when he saw the envelope in Daniel's hand. "Did you pay the fees, son?" his father asked, his voice hoarse from the constant strain of his illness. "Yes, Papa," Daniel replied softly, handing him the envelope. "I got the receipt." His father's face brightened. "Good. That's one less worry. I'm proud of you, Daniel." But Daniel's heart was heavy. He had lied, he hadn't told his father the full truth. His father had praised him for doing the right thing, but Daniel had accepted help from a stranger, and he hadn't come clean about how he had gotten the money. He walked inside the house, avoiding his stepmother's sharp gaze. She was sitting by the window, sewing a patch onto a torn piece of clothing. As soon as she saw Daniel, she looked up, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "You're back," she said curtly. "Did you pay the fees?" "Yes, Mama," Daniel answered, his voice low. He could already sense her disapproval, though she hadn't said anything yet. He could feel the weight of her anger looming over him, especially with the money situation being so tight. His father sat down beside Daniel, turning to face him with a look of concern. "Did anything happen on your way to school, son? Is everything okay?" Daniel hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. He could feel the lump in his throat as he thought about Clara's sacrifice. "Papa, I need to tell you something. Revelation and consequences." His father raised an eyebrow, sensing something was wrong. "What is it, Daniel?" Daniel's voice faltered as he spoke. I lost the money on my way to school. The school fees, I mean." He looked up at his father, his eyes filled with regret. "I searched everywhere, but I couldn't find it." His father's face fell. For a moment, there was silence. Daniel could feel the disappointment and frustration in his father's eyes. Then, his father let out a heavy sigh. "Daniel, how could you be so careless?" His father's voice was sharp, though it was tinged with concern. "Do you know how hard your mother and I have worked for that money? And now it's gone. What are we going to do? How could you let this happen?" Daniel's heart sank, his stomach churning with guilt. "I didn't mean to, Papa. I tried to find it, but it was too late. I was scared to come back home without it." His father placed his hands on his knees, frustration and sadness etched into his features. "This money was everything to us. Your stepmother and I were counting on it. She's already upset about our situation. You don't know how much this hurts." Just then, Daniel's stepmother entered the room, overhearing the conversation. Her eyes, usually sharp and critical, were now filled with anger. "You lost the money," she snapped, her voice cold. "Do you have any idea how hard things are for us? We can barely afford to feed ourselves, and now this. You wasted the only chance we had." Daniel flinched under her harsh words, his face burning with shame. "I'm sorry, Mama. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't know what to do." His stepmother's eyes narrowed. "Well, I guess we'll just have to figure out how to scrape by again. You've really messed things up, Daniel." Daniel's father looked at his wife, his face filled with sorrow. "Can't you see he's already upset enough? There's no need to make it worse. He's just a boy." But his stepmother was already shaking her head, her voice filled with bitterness. "I don't care how young he is. This is just another example of his carelessness. How are we supposed to survive if we can't even rely on our own son to be responsible?" Daniel's father stood up, his voice becoming firm. "Enough. We can't keep fighting like this. We need to focus on what we have, not what we've lost." But Daniel couldn't take the harsh words any longer. He stood up quickly, feeling the weight of their anger pressing down on him. "There's something else I need to tell you," he said, his voice shaky. "A woman helped me. Her name is Clara. She saw me crying, and she gave me the money for my school fees. She's a widow, and she didn't have much, but she helped me anyway. She told me to study hard and not to forget her kindness." His father stared at him in silence, the shock registering on his face. His stepmother, however, was livid. "You took money from a stranger," she spat, her voice rising. "How dare you? We don't accept charity from people we don't know. This is what you get for trusting strangers. What were you thinking?" Daniel's father raised a hand, trying to calm the situation. "Hold on, please. Let's think about this for a moment. Yes, it's unusual, but it sounds like this woman had good intentions. If she was willing to help you, maybe we should be grateful instead of angry." But his stepmother wasn't listening. "Grateful? You want us to thank a stranger for throwing us a bone? We are struggling here, and you're accepting help from people we don't even know. This is not the way to handle our problems." Daniel's father sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I understand. But Daniel made a mistake, and now we have to move forward. We have enough to focus on without fighting over this." The change in the household. The atmosphere in the house grew tense. Daniel's stepmother was clearly upset with him, and even though his father tried to keep the peace, Daniel could feel the anger simmering beneath the surface. He wished he could go back and undo the whole situation, but he couldn't. His stepmother's hostility was palpable, and it was affecting everyone. There was no warmth in the house anymore, only coldness and resentment. Every time Daniel spoke, his stepmother gave him a pointed look, as if blaming him for everything that had gone wrong. Daniel's father, despite his illness and exhaustion, tried to maintain his composure. He didn't want the family torn apart over a mistake, but he could see that the tensions were building. He sat Daniel down that evening, trying to offer some comfort. "Son, I know things are tough. But you can't let this tear you apart. You've made a mistake, but it doesn't define you. What matters is what you do next. Keep your focus on your studies. Don't get distracted by everything that's happening around you." Daniel nodded, but the words didn't bring him much comfort. He could still feel his stepmother's anger, and he knew that the tension in the house wasn't going to go away anytime soon. As he lay in bed that night, Daniel couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would Clara's kindness ever come back to help him? And could he ever repair the rift he had caused within his own family? The loss of hope. Clara's hardship. Clara woke up early as she did every day. The small, modest house she lived in was cramped and uncomfortable, but it was hers, and she had made it a home. She lived alone with her young daughter, Hope, who was just 8 years old. Hope was the light of Clara's life, a bright, cheerful child who always found ways to keep her spirits high, even when the world around them seemed to be falling apart. Clara's days were long and tiring. She sold fruits by the roadside, bananas, pineapples, oranges, and whatever else she could find to sell. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy food for her daughter and keep a roof over their heads. Every morning, Clara would pack her little basket with fruit, sit under a small, shaded awning, and wait for customers to pass by. The work was grueling, but it kept her and Hope alive. But things were getting harder. The weather had been cruel, and the markets were slow. The income from her fruit stall was barely enough to cover their daily expenses, and she had fallen behind on her rent. Clara could feel the weight of her struggles pressing down on her shoulders more each day. She had nothing left to give, and yet her heart refused to give up. One morning, as Clara was preparing to open her store, she noticed a group of men walking down the street, their boots heavy on the ground. They carried official-looking papers and were talking to the other street vendors, shouting orders. Clara's heart sank when she saw them approach her store. "Move it. This is government property now," one of the men yelled, holding up a large piece of paper. "All stalls must be removed immediately." Clara stood up, her hands trembling, as she tried to reason with them. "Please, wait. I don't have anywhere else to go. This is all I have to feed my daughter." But the men didn't listen. They grabbed her baskets of fruit, tossing them aside as they began tearing down the wooden structure of her store. Her heart shattered as she watched the little business she had worked so hard to build crumble in front of her eyes. The few customers who had been passing by quickly turned away, uninterested in getting involved. As the men continued to destroy her store, Clara could only stand there, frozen. She was powerless against them. In a matter of minutes, her livelihood was gone. "Please, just let me pack up my things," she begged, her voice hoarse with desperation. But the men paid no attention to her cries. They ripped apart her store, sending the pieces flying. Clara was left standing in the middle of the street, holding a single, broken basket of fruit in her hands. Her heart sank as she realized there was nothing left for her to sell. She had lost everything. The tipping point. That evening, when Clara returned home, she found her landlord waiting outside the gate, his arms crossed and a scowl on his face. The landlord was a cruel man, and Clara had known for a while that he was growing impatient with her inability to pay the rent. She had tried to make arrangements, but nothing had worked. "Clara, you're late again," the landlord said coldly, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've had enough chances. I've given you enough time. You have to leave. You're not paying, and I won't tolerate it anymore." Clara's stomach churned. She had known this moment was coming, but the finality of it hit her like a blow. She had nowhere to go, no money to pay for another place, and no one to turn to. She tried to explain, but her words were met with a stone wall of indifference. "I'm sorry, Clara," the landlord said, sneering. But you have to find somewhere else to stay. I don't care where, just get out. With that, the landlord turned his back and walked away, leaving Clara standing there, stunned and broken. She gathered hope in her arms and tried to calm her down, but the reality of their situation was clear. They had nowhere to go. That night, Clara and Hope slept outside on the cold, hard ground, their belongings scattered around them in a small heap. Clara held Hope close, trying to shield her from the harsh reality that surrounded them. The night was long and lonely, and Clara's heart was heavy with despair. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her, and yet she couldn't stop thinking about the promise she had made to Daniel. She had given him her last money, and in doing so, she had hoped to help him change his life. She had trusted that he would remember her kindness and go on to achieve something great. But now, Clara felt like her own dreams were slipping away. Everything she had worked for was gone, and she was left with nothing but empty hands and a heart full of sorrow. Despite everything, Clara refused to let go of the hope she had for Daniel. She didn't know how, but she believed that somehow, he would make it. He had shown such potential, and she believed that his future was bright. She thought of him every night, praying that he would fulfill his dreams, that he would rise above the circumstances that had held him back, and that one day, he would come back to help her. A prayer for a miracle. Clara sat quietly that night, holding Hope tightly as they lay on the cold, unforgiving ground. The moon was high in the sky, casting a pale light over the desolate street. Clara closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, her voice barely audible above the sounds of the night. God, please help us, she prayed softly. I don't know how much more I can take. I don't know how much longer I can keep fighting. But I trust in you. You know what we've lost, and you know what we need. Please, show us a way out. Show us a miracle. She paused for a moment, her eyes closing tightly as she held back tears. And God, if you can, help Daniel. He has so much potential, so much promise. I helped him once, and I pray that he will fulfill the dreams I had for him. Please, watch over him and help him make something of himself. Clara's heart was heavy, but she held on to her faith. She had given everything she had to help Daniel, and now she needed a miracle. She didn't know where that miracle would come from, or when, but she trusted that somehow, things would get better. It had to. Hope stood beside her, and Clara held her daughter close, whispering softly, "Don't worry, my child. We will get through this. I don't know how, but we will." As Clara whispered her prayer into the night, she held on to the belief that someday, her faith would be rewarded, and she would find the hope she so desperately needed. The unexpected turn. A new beginning. The days that followed were filled with hardship. Clara and Hope had no choice but to continue living on the streets, moving from one place to another, trying to find shelter wherever they could. The cold nights and empty stomachs had taken their toll, and Clara's spirit began to wear thin. She couldn't understand how life had become so cruel. It seemed as if every step forward was met with 2 steps backward. Yet, in the midst of all this, Clara never lost sight of the promise she had made to Daniel. No matter how tough things got, she held on to the belief that her sacrifice for him would not be in vain. Then, one bright morning, everything changed. Clara had just finished scrounging together some old fabric she hoped to sell when her phone rang. She hadn't expected a call. The phone was an old, battered model, the kind that barely worked. But when she saw the name flashing on the screen, her heart skipped a beat. "Mary. Is that really you?" Clara's voice trembled as she answered the call. Mary, her long-lost friend from her youth, had been a beacon of hope in Clara's early life. They had shared dreams of a better life, of escaping the poverty that surrounded them. But as often happened, their paths diverged. Mary had moved to another city years ago, and they had lost touch. Now, after all this time, she was calling Clara. Yes, Clara, it's me, Mary's warm voice replied. I've been hearing about the struggles you've been going through. I'm so sorry for everything you've had to endure. But I think it's time for you to come to me. I've built a life here, and I want to help you start over. You and Hope both deserve a fresh start. Clara's heart surged with emotion. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Mary, who had once been in the same situation as Clara, had now become successful. She had turned her life around and was now offering Clara a lifeline. I don't know what to say, Mary, Clara whispered, her voice cracking. You're offering us so much. But I don't know how we could ever repay you. There's no need for repayment, Clara. I just want to see you and Hope live better lives. Come to me. I'll help you get back on your feet. The offer was too good to refuse. Clara, though hesitant at first, agreed to make the journey. She gathered Hope and they began to prepare for the move. With just a few belongings in tow, they boarded a bus to the city that Mary had called home. It was a long journey, but as they traveled, Clara began to feel a glimmer of hope that had been absent for so long. Maybe this was the break they had been waiting for. The journey of redemption. When Clara and Hope arrived in the city, they were met by Mary at the bus station, a broad smile on her face. Clara felt tears well up in her eyes as she embraced her friend. It had been years since they had last seen each other, but it felt as though no time had passed at all. Mary took them to her home, a cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood. The change in Clara's life was almost too much to take in. The space was clean, warm, and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold streets they had been living on. As Mary showed them around, Clara couldn't help but feel a wave of gratitude and disbelief. She had never imagined that life could turn around so quickly. Mary wasted no time in helping Clara get back on her feet. She provided Clara with money to start a small business, allowing her to buy the materials she needed to make homemade crafts, soap, candles, and hand-woven baskets. Mary encouraged her to follow her passion for creating beautiful, handmade goods. With her support, Clara slowly built a new life, selling her creations at the local market. The hard work was still there, but Clara no longer had to worry about where her next meal would come from or where they would sleep that night. Her faith, which had been shaken by the endless struggles, was slowly restored. She could see the path forward now, and with each new day, she felt more confident in her ability to rebuild her life. Hope, too, began to thrive, attending school and making new friends. It wasn't easy, but it was a new beginning. And for the first time in a long while, Clara dared to believe that things could truly get better. A powerful meeting. Meanwhile, back in Daniel's town, life had also taken a turn. The boy who had once been on the brink of despair, crying on the roadside with no hope in sight, had grown into a young man full of ambition and promise. Daniel had worked tirelessly through the years, using his mother's sacrifice and Clara's kindness as fuel to push him forward. He had excelled in school, graduated with honors, and gone on to university, where he studied business. His natural intelligence and work ethic quickly gained him recognition in the business world, and soon he was offered a well-paying job at a respected company. But despite his success, Daniel never forgot the woman who had changed his life. He had promised Clara that he would never forget her kindness, and that promise stayed with him, guiding him every step of the way. He knew that he owed much of his success to her, and he had made it his goal to find her again, to thank her, and to repay her in some way for the selfless help she had given him all those years ago. Daniel asked around, trying to find any information about Clara's whereabouts, but it wasn't easy. Many people remembered her, but no one knew where she had gone after her stall had been destroyed. Determined, Daniel began searching more seriously. He reached out to old acquaintances, inquired at local markets, and followed every lead he could find. His determination paid off when he finally discovered that Clara had moved to the city where his old friend, Mary, now lived. Without hesitation, Daniel packed his bags and set off for the city. He was nervous and excited at the same time. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew one thing for sure: he had to find Clara. He needed to thank her for everything she had done, to show her that her kindness had not been in vain. After a few days of searching, Daniel finally found Clara's new address. When he knocked on her door, Clara was in the kitchen, preparing a new batch of handmade soap. When she opened the door and saw Daniel standing there, her heart skipped a beat. She didn't recognize him at first, but then Daniel smiled, and she saw the familiar spark of kindness in his eyes. "Daniel," Clara whispered, her voice filled with surprise and emotion. "Is it really you?" Daniel stepped forward, his voice full of gratitude. "Yes, it's me. I've come to thank you for everything you did for me. I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for your kindness. You changed my life, Clara. I will never forget that." Clara stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed with emotion. Tears welled up in her eyes as she hugged Daniel, the young man who had once been a boy in need, now standing before her, strong and successful. "I never expected this," Clara said softly, wiping away her tears. "I only did what I could. I never imagined it would lead to this." Daniel smiled, his heart full of warmth. "You gave me hope when I had none. I'm here to repay that hope. You'll never have to worry again, Clara. I'll make sure of it." The full circle. Daniel's success. Years had passed since Daniel's fateful meeting with Clara, and he had come a long way. He was no longer the frightened, helpless boy who had lost his school fees. Now, Daniel was a successful businessman, well respected in his field, and his company had grown into one of the leading firms in the city. His hard work, dedication, and the lessons he had learned along the way had paid off. But despite his achievements, Daniel never forgot where he had come from. He never forgot the woman who had taken him in when he had nothing, who had given him hope when the world seemed against him. Clara's kindness had been the spark that had ignited his determination to succeed. Her selfless act of helping him had shaped his life in ways he could never fully explain, and no matter how successful he became, he owed so much to her. As Daniel sat in his office one evening, looking out at the bustling city below, he thought back to the days when his family struggled to make ends meet. He remembered the weight of the money his mother had entrusted to him and how it had slipped through his fingers. He remembered the tears in his eyes as he stood on the roadside, helpless and afraid. But most of all, he remembered Clara. Her words echoed in his mind, "One day, you will make something of yourself." He had kept that promise in his heart for years. And now, standing at the peak of his career, he knew it was time to repay her. It wasn't just about money. It was about showing Clara that her sacrifice had been worth it, that her kindness had made a difference. "I have to find her," Daniel said to himself, his voice firm with determination. "I have to thank her." A meeting of kindness. Daniel's search for Clara was not easy. Over the years, her whereabouts had become a mystery. He had asked around, inquired in markets, and followed every lead he could find. He knew that Clara had moved to another city after her store was destroyed, but where exactly? After months of persistence, Daniel's efforts finally paid off when he found out where Clara had settled. She had built a life for herself there, turning her struggles into triumph. When Daniel finally found her address, his heart raced. He had imagined this moment for so long, and now that it was finally here, he felt both nervous and excited. He wanted to thank her, to show her how much her kindness had meant to him. Clara's business was thriving. She had built a successful little company selling homemade goods, and her small store was a reflection of her hard work and perseverance. It was a modest business, but it was hers, and it brought her joy to see it flourish. Clara had found her peace, her new beginning, and she was living a life she had never dreamed possible. When Daniel arrived at her shop, he stood outside for a moment, taking in the sight of the woman who had once changed his life. Clara was busy in the back, organizing her products when Daniel knocked gently on the door. Clara opened the door, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. She looked at him, confused, as if trying to place his face. Then, recognition flickered in her eyes, and her hand flew to her mouth in shock. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Is it really you?" Daniel smiled warmly, his heart full of gratitude. "Yes, Clara, it's me. I've come to thank you for everything you did for me. You helped me when I had nothing, and I will never forget that." Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as she embraced him. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "Look at you, how far you've come. I'm so proud of you, Daniel." Daniel stepped back and handed Clara a small package. It was a gift, something simple but meaningful, a symbol of his appreciation. Inside the package was money, the amount he had worked so hard to earn, and a note that read, "To the woman who gave me hope when I had none. You changed my life, and I will forever be grateful." Clara looked at the gift, her heart swelling with emotion. "I never expected this," she said softly, her voice choked with tears. "You've made me so proud, Daniel. I always knew you would make something of yourself." Daniel smiled, his voice full of warmth. "You're the reason I did. You gave me that first spark of hope. I wouldn't be here without you." A bond of friendship and gratitude. The reunion between Daniel and Clara was filled with laughter and tears. They sat together, reminiscing about the past, talking about their struggles and triumphs. Clara shared how she had rebuilt her life, and Daniel spoke about his journey to success. It was a conversation that flowed with ease, two people who had shared a bond built on kindness and sacrifice. Daniel thanked Clara repeatedly, not just for the money, but for the way she had believed in him when no one else did. "You didn't just give me money, Clara," he said, his voice sincere. "You gave me a chance. You gave me hope. And that is something that can never be repaid in full." Clara smiled, wiping a tear from her eye. "I never wanted anything in return, Daniel. I just wanted you to succeed. You are the reason I believe that kindness matters. You are proof that one small act of goodness can change the world." The bond between Clara and Daniel grew even stronger that day. Their friendship was no longer just about the past, it was about the future. Clara had been the turning point in Daniel's life, and now he was determined to help her in any way he could. Together, they dreamed of future endeavors, of new businesses, and of helping others just as they had helped each other. As Daniel left Clara's shop that day, his heart was full of gratitude. He had come full circle, from the boy who had lost his school fees to the man who had found success. But the true reward had always been the lessons he had learned along the way. That kindness, no matter how small, could change everything. And that sometimes, the greatest rewards come not from what we receive, but from what we give.